Worldwide movement, peace, love, respect, Big King Sadiq. Back at you. Going to continue that video on occultism, on more directly on spiritual possessions, energetic compromisation of different levels. And it's just funny how whenever I do some of these videos that touch on some of the more nefarious aspects or the more dark energies on the planet, it's just funny how I get interrupted. But anyway, let's not be paranoid. But yeah, this information being compiled, again, from my own discoveries, from my research, and that of others, right? Other credible sources. Okay, so try to go back to where I left off at, talking about how widespread this is, and I was talking about how I had a position with the company to put me in a lot of areas on a grassroots level, like, really in neighborhoods, talking with folks on a very intimate level, right? A very interpersonal level, so to speak, and really getting a good feel on a grassroots level for many of these communities. And what I found firsthand is that for at least myself, and what my knowledge was previous to this, I had no idea there was so much occultic activity, so much and when I say occultic activity, I mean a wide range of things, right? Druid activity, pagan activity, and when I say activity, I mean rituals being held to this day, often in wooded areas on the outskirts or edges of these communities. Witchcraft or Wiccan covens, sorcery, you name it, right? What many would term as voodoo or hoodoo, which understandably are two different disciplines, but still related. And what I found also, which I wasn't necessarily aware of, is that a lot of those occultic practices and rituals are tied to rituals that go on in a lot of these, what's the term I want to use? Fraternal lodges, right? Whether they be Masonic lodges or of some other exclusive membership, shall we say, right? And many of this, I'm telling you folks, when I say widespread, I mean community to community, neighbor to neighbor. There is a lot of this going on, right? And I'm not putting any judgment on it as negative, positive, good, bad, or the other. I'm right now just discussing how widespread it is, which is certainly was a bit of a shock, or at the very least a surprise to me, because I didn't realize how widespread it was. And has been growing in popularity as of late, interestingly enough. Now, what that means in relationship to the times that we're living in, and relationship to the reaction many people are having to the times that we're living in, we can all make a determination on that individually. Um, but yeah, you see the symbolism, which is a huge part of it, because a lot of people may walk right past many of the symbols not knowing the history behind those symbols and what they actually mean. It took me a great deal of research to start to uncover and learn about these things, learn about the symbolism behind the owls and the popularity of the owls, learning about the gargoyles, right? Learning about some of the Eastern symbolism, right? Um, you have to go back and study into different Mandarin legends and other Asian sources to learn about some of that and how there are different deities depicted. Of course, you would understand different statues and whatnot depicting different deities for folks who have different religious backgrounds, whether it be Buddhism, Hinduism, etc. That's all understandable. But a lot of that symbology is there, whether it be in the form of statues, um, very strange artwork. I've seen I've seen some really incredible artwork that it took for me to go back and start to look up imagery of different deity expressions to understand what I was really looking at. um, there's a lot of that out there. Okay, so that just gives you an understanding of how widespread, and then as you start to talk to folks, then you really get an idea, right? Especially if you're one who's astute and paying attention to what people say, how they say it, why and when they say it, right? But what's very interesting, again, with all this occult practices and ritualism, how it ties back into these secret orders or fraternal orders, and how all of it is very dependent on this certain level of secrecy that is enjoyed on a neighborhood level, right? Um, and it ties into and flows right into the sort of family secret thing, right? It's that intimate is what I'm trying to get you all to understand. We often think of these things, or some of us think of these things as being like very far off and there's no witchcraft in my community. There very likely is, right? And again, not saying whether that's good, bad, or the other. I'm just telling you, and right now discussing the popularity of all this and how it is very intimate in our neighborhoods, right? And it's not just this part of the country. This is true all over the U.S., but moreover, it's true worldwide, right? And the more you do research, you uncover that, right? So let's examine where we're at right now. We have widespread occultism of various forms all over the planet, country, and quite often on a very intimate neighborhood level, right? With that, we have a lot of ritualistic practices and a lot of adherence to secrecy, right? Again, all the way down to a very intimate neighborhood or even family level, right? So, and then all also tied to these secret organizations, right? You know, I mentioned Masonic orders and other fraternal orders, and anything that you would classify or deem as a secret society. All of this is very intertwined, right? Now, um, so that's important to know so that you can understand the different levels of scope. I talked a little bit about scope on the widespread neighborhood level, and then I just mentioned a little bit about the ties to organizations, right? Um, when you get inside of these organizations, and many have done um, documentaries and research on the socioeconomic elites and their ritualistic behavior in these um, often secret, uh, uh, very detailed rituals, right? Um, that are almost always held in secret, or in some level of exclusivity, right? Um, and mentioning the elite, we have to really understand how broad of a scope that is, right? Um, Literally, when you get to a certain social status or a certain financial bracket, you sort of bring yourself up into recognition for membership. you might you might want to say, um, and that is if you don't have some of the other ties that already are so widespread. Families very deeply tied into this. Many children don't realize that they're born into families that have had this stuff going on for generations, right? And often they are promised into certain levels of activity within these rituals, and that is, sometimes people break away from that. There's stories of a young courageous girl, and you can find it right on YouTube. I think it's still there, where it talks about how this young girl was raised by her grandmother. She called her Nan. And her Nan, unfortunately, was a member of a satanic cult and took this girl into and made her participate in so many horrific ritualistic practices, right? A lot of it I'm not even going to get into the details of. You can look for it yourself. But let's just say it's very graphic, and what was done to this girl, sexually, abusively. It's deep, and it was, spearheaded by the girl's own grandmother, right? Unfortunately, through research, this is not uncommon. I shouldn't say it's not uncommon. I'll say it's far more widespread than I ever thought, and that many of us would like to believe, right? But again, it's important to understand this stuff happens on a level-to-level basis, ascending, right? It's on the neighborhood level. It's on the organizational level, right? It's on even the governmental level, right? Because many of your politicians, almost all of them, belong to and have been groomed by one of these organizations, right? Specifically for service to that organization or um, the overall agenda, which is held by many of these organizations. See, they are organized to the level that many of you have heard of the reference, the hidden hand. And you see, I talked about this in previous videos, where you see historical figures like Napoleon Bonaparte, and a lot often, either political figures or military figures, right? They'll have their hand affixed in their coat jacket with only their thumb pretty much visible, and the rest tucked into the coat jacket, symbolizing what's referred to as the hidden hand, which the hidden hand refers to the web of these secret organizations that ultimately form a hidden hand that controls and manipulates the entire world. That is very much symbolic of the control level that the social economic elites hold on this planet, right? And it is through this very intimate and complex structure, or this web. Like I said, it goes all the way down to the neighborhood level, right? And I'm talking about all neighborhoods and all types of neighborhood, folks. Don't think that your neighborhood is like, exempt from this. I'd love to say that some are, but I've generally found that there's at least some level of this activity in most neighborhoods. Yeah, that's just the way it is. Not saying everybody in every neighborhood is down with this stuff, but I'm saying the activity is there. If you look, there's usually some complicit element within the community. I'll leave it at that, right? But yeah, these organizations are very well structured, and it's been maintained for thousands of years. These secret organizations, folks, secret societies, though have gained popularity and discussion in recent years, is not a new thing. Not at all. This goes back, again, thousands of years, and actually emanates out of a place that many people wouldn't think, which is out of Africa, or what is termed the continent of Africa. I don't really like that word because of how the continent was given that word, given that name. Certainly not the original name, and not fitting. Some say Alkabula, other indigenous names or terms given like Kush and certain regions like Kemet and so forth. But regardless, the point is, these secret societies go back that far, right? And have maintained their level of organization for that long and that intimately all around the world. They do this because mainly of their level of infiltration, right? They literally have infiltrated throughout history every institution that touches our lives. Very literally, right? And this is everywhere, all around the world. I'm not just referring in the United States. All around the world is their reach and this control system. And we see that now, how they're implementing things like Agenda 21. I'm not going to side off into that discussion, but that's an example of how they operate and have operated. But back to the spiritual aspect of it and the occult aspect of it and the very ritualistic aspect of it. We often hear about people selling their soul, so to speak, right? And in many cases, it is quite literal with the contract and everything, right? You know, I've even come across people, believe it or not, who've been in certain unexpected situations where they think it's a great opportunity, turns out to be literally one of these sort of recruiting situations, right? Who they come across creepily, the little pin that pricks your finger, gets some of your blood to trickle down and become the ink. All of that, folks. I know it sounds like, come on, no, really, this stuff is really going on. The music industry, there are tons of, the information is just there. Just, I don't even have to spend time on that. Just go and look. If you open your eyes, it's easy to find out about the occult ties in the music industry and how the social economic elites who run all these organizations that control this web, how they so darkly impact, so nefariously and negatively impact the music industry is ridiculous. You know, the level of individuals within the music industry who quote unquote sell their soul for success is astronomical. Not everybody, not all of them do. Not all of them do, but the higher up when you get success, and again, not all of them do. I can't say that clearly enough. But there is a pretty high percentage who have some involvement on those levels, the higher they get. Because you're talking about intertwining and now doing business with those same individuals who are at the tops of these organizations, right? Because these organizations, as I said, are responsible for running the world, which means controlling the economy of the planet. They print the money. They determine what the money is or isn't, right? Or at least they trick us into giving them that power. So the music industry is evident. The entertainment industry, a lot of folks know and hear about, you know, the nefarious practices of Hollywood, and we see more and more how a lot of things about Hollywood, you know, wood from a holly tree, make your little wands, magic wands and whatnot. It's a trip. Anyway, yeah, you know, Hollywood, we can just look at recent years and what all has started to come out about that with the incredibly dark and horrific, horrific child molestation rings and the stuff that, and that actually in itself gives you a small picture of how it all how they operate, right? A lot of these child stars, their parents were approached by somebody from the industry, wealthy, and, you know, without making an indictment, the truth is many of these parents sold their children into it. They did. You have to tell the truth of what occurred, right? And then their children became victims of this sick system that they've had going on, you know, from all the various forms of child abuse, child molestation rings, sex slaves, sex slave trafficking, trafficking women and children, torture, the sick adrenochrome industry, you know, all of that is tied in together with all of these high-level organizations that these socio-economic elites run, right? And they maintain their secrecy and their level of control often by compromising certain individuals that they need or want to use as pawns in their execution of all this, right? And the levels of compromisation are varied and often can go up to and include actual spiritual possession, right? Which is almost an anytime prospect for individuals who have sold their soul. They don't, from what I understand, experience